Hi, on a very hot day in Washington, D.C. Been asked a lot about the Human Rights Now tour that went around the world um, with 5 artists: Bruce Springsteen, Sting, Peter Gabriel, Yusuf N'Dour, and Tracy Chapman. All were brilliant. What people didn't know about that tour is that every night before anybody got in the stadium, practically, all the artists were volunteered to go out and sing. They'd Stand Up, Get Up by Bob Marley, Stand Up for Your Rights by Bob Marley. And we wanted to honor Bob because we felt he had been the musician that had moved the world to talk about human rights and to honor him in that, and they did that every night. I think in some ways, some of the funny things that happened on the world tours, like in Hungary, they didn't want us to hand out the Declaration of Human Rights. They said, you can't do that. So what Bill Graham and I and George Travis decided to do, our tour coordinators, that we'd pitch the lights down into the dark, and then we would have these declarations by a whole mess of people through the crowd, and we'd just pitch all these human rights up in the air. And we did exactly that, and people were so shocked that all of a sudden there's these pamphlets flying all over the stadium, because Bill Graham had arranged for everybody to hand these things out. And I don't know whether they had them blown out by fans or what, but they went everywhere. Anyway, that's how we spread the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in Hungary. I think in some ways the moments that you remember of each artist is that Peter Gabriel would sing Biko each night, and it was the heart and soul of the world tour. That was the marriage of human rights and music, as well as Springsteen gave a speech in Zimbabwe to the South Africans, how they shouldn't fight their own people on apartheid and become a free nation in South Africa and overcome apartheid. It was a brilliant speech. And then he also talked about apartheid in the United States, was just as brilliant. Tracy Chapman would open up with a simple guitar, and her youthfulness and the powerfulness of her voice and her song was she just brought the crowd up on their feet magically. Most of the crowds that we were at never had seen a West African artist like Yusuf N'Dour, is one of the great voices of the world. He really was magnificent, and it was performing. It was a great performance because it was so different than everybody else's. And then, of course, Sting sang "They Dance Alone," and his music. Wow, the police leader, which he was, he'd bring some of those songs, but new songs into it, and he would sing "They Would Dance Alone" about the disappeared in Latin America. Throughout, really, it was about the women of Chile, but it was against the horrors that were occurring, disappearances in Central America, where 300,000 Indians were killed in the Reagan period, and Latin America was on fire with abuse against their own citizens, as well as South Africa was on fire with apartheid. USSR was on fire by putting people in prison all the time. So the tour was up against all those human rights abuses, and we feel it was a worthy answer to some of that. And for me, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is precious because it was written by the Roosevelt family, mainly Eleanor. The President FDR won the war, and he defeated depression in the 30s. And he's credited with that, of course. But in some ways, Eleanor is a bigger person because she saw the future coming, and she saw what happened in Nazi Germany, and wanted to set the world in a different direction that would never occur again. And the Universal Declaration of Human Rights came from her heart, not from her head. And that declaration is agreed upon, and the world has yet to really adopt it. And so I think one of the goals of my own life has been to promote the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in gratitude to Eleanor, and our gratitude in our family, because Franklin Delano Roosevelt passed the Social Security bill, which meant my 4 youngest of us when my father was killed, that the 4 youngest of us would get checks. And those checks saved us from going to an orphanage or splitting our family up. And my mom was able to have the money to buy food for her 4 youngest babies. And so I was grateful to the Roosevelt family. And that's why I did the world tour. And I also thought, that the 4 things that Amnesty was fighting, which was entirely appropriate: political imprisonment, torture, fair trials. And I think for me it was too narrow. We needed to go to the full Declaration of Human Rights, not just 4 of the points. And so that tour was in support of the fullness of the Declaration of Human Rights. And the human rights movement ought to move off that broad agenda, because the smaller agenda sort of favored the West in some way, and I didn't like that. I wanted to overcome that, and that was my way of overcoming it, by doing a world tour with the Universal Declaration in its 40th anniversary, and to thank the Roosevelt family for bringing that about. So thanks for listening. It's pretty important to me, and I hope I did all right today. Thank you. It's a lot of information, but
It's good. It's good.
I think we're getting there, man.